exciting series in this channel, and in this tutorial we're going to be working with Django and AJAX. We are going to be looking at some practical use cases of AJAX in Django. So this tutorial is going to be a series. In each video we're going to be implementing practical AJAX example. So before we proceed, why not smash the like and subscribe button and hit the notification bell so that you get notified whenever we upload new content. First, what is AJAX? AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Though there's an XML in the acronym, it is commonly used with the JSON data format, which is an alternative to XML. In my own opinion, XML is kind of outdated, so I believe nobody uses XML anymore. So in that case, the name should be changed to Asynchronous JavaScript and JSON. I think that would be better. It's a very useful technique in web development for creating fast and dynamic web page without having to reload our entire page. And you see this in most big tech companies like Facebook, Google, Instagram, and Twitter. They use AJAX a lot for real-time updates. So what do we do with AJAX? AJAX allows us to read data from our web server without having to refresh our web page, which I said before, and also allows us to post data to our web server in the background, like sending a post request in the background. So in that case, we can say AJAX is simply to exchange data between the server and the client without having to reload our page. So how does this work in the background? How does AJAX really work? This is a clear diagram that I get from W3 School. I guess some of you should be familiar with that website, which say in our web browser or in our web page, an event occur. It may be a click event or probably a screw event or a change event, and when this event occur, we create an XML HTTP request object, and this request object is sent over to the server, and the server processes the HTTP request object. And when we say HTTP request object, it's not only XML, as I said before. It can be a JSON object or an HTML or even plain text. So when this request is sent, the server processes the HTTP request, it creates the response and sends the data back to the browser, and the browser receives the data using JavaScript or probably jQuery, which we'll be using, and our page gets a real-time update. So jQuery makes working with AJAX very easy, so that's what we're using in the course of this tutorial. So let's take a quick look at our demo, what we'll be building together. Sometimes it is called infinite screw or loading more data on screw to the ending of the page, and this, you see these functionalities in most social networks like Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Whenever you screw to the bottom of your page, it loads more data. When you scroll, it loads more data like an infinite screw. You can see it in Facebook. This is my Facebook. You see when we scroll down, it loads in, it's loading. Network is bad and it loads more data. You scroll again, it loads more data. So this is the functionality that we'll be starting with. You can see our own demo here. When we scroll to the bottom of the page, it loads in more data. You see it shows us a message, then later it loads in more data, it loads again. So this is what we'll be doing in the course of this first video, and there are other more examples that we'll be implementing. So enough of the talking, let's dive straight to our code editor and let's start building this. We are going to be using just jQuery, AJAX, and Django, no extra packages or framework. Alright, so quick in our development page, I've already set up a basic Django app. I created a project called Django AJAX. I created an app which is AJAX example. So I defined a simple model for us to work with, which is the blog post model that has title, post, and author, which is just a simple chart feed. And that's that. And if you head over to our admin, let's log into our admin, and then to the blog post model that I showed you. I've already populated it with about 20 blog posts. So this is the post we'll be working with. So I did this off camera so that to save our time. So we have our post ready in our database. So I think that's all we've already set up. There's nothing else, just the app and the model. finished. So we are starting basically from scratch, just normal basic setup. So I believe you should know how to do this already. You know how to create your virtual environment, how to install your Django, and how to create your Django project and Django app. So that's for that. So what we're heading now, we're creating our first view, which is the simple view that will render the view. You see the view is empty, there's nothing here, so we create a very simple, let's call it post lead, and it's simply going to return the HTML. Then we'll return a, let's say, post slash index.html. Then we've not created that also, so we head over to our app, which is the AJAX example, and we'll create a folder called, okay, I've already created a folder, sorry, I created a folder called template. There's nothing in the templates folder, so here we'll create another folder inside and we'll call it posts, and inside the post we'll create a file called index.html. Alright, that's all specified here. Simple. So this is just going to be a normal HTML5 template and nothing more. You can just rename this to be AJAX example. And also we'll be using Bootstrap CDN link to make our code work faster, so there's no need for us to be creating our own CSS. So I'll head over to the Bootstrap page now. I had it open up already, so I'm going to copy the CDN links. Alright, we paste the CDN links of the Bootstrap, and the Bootstrap jQuery is the slim version of the slim mini version of jQuery, and this slim version doesn't really has the AJAX methods and functions that we need, so we're going to change it to the normal jQuery. So what we'll do, I head over to the jQuery CDN and get the normal jQuery, not the slim one. The slim one will not work. I tried that and I had a hard time finding out what was the issue until I had to know that the slim does not come with the AJAX functionality. So you get the normal jQuery and we switch it with the mass jQuery. Alright, so we have to save and then save this also. So we have to head over to the project URL. Since we are going to be working with probably just one URL, so there's no need for us to create a separate URL file, so we use this one. Let's import from AJAX example dot views. We're going to import the post list view. That's the view we want to work with. It'll be path equals to the home route. Then we'll head to the home route. We want to render the post list view. Let's give it the name of post list. List. Okay. So that's for the URL. Comma, and then save this. Okay. Now we can see our HTML page. There's nothing on internet. So let's just put on H1 for us to know if it's to test if it's working. Save this. So let's make sure our server is running. Okay, we have to, sorry, let me clear this. Start our server pattern. Okay, it's working. Our home page is working, which is the AJAX and Django. Alright, we are good to go. It's time for us to start implementing our AJAX code. So before we do that, we're going to define the container, the class of container, which is bootstrap container class. Add a little margin top and bottom of 4. Alright, inside the div container, we'll create another div which we're going to call row. We'll create a row. Let's create a row, and then inside this row we'll just create one bootstrap grid. Let's give it a grid size of, let's say, 9, or can make it 8, and then alright, and then let's just give it a margin S, as margin left and right, also to put it at the center. Okay, so inside here we'll just create one simple div called content, which we're going to give an ID of post dash container. So this is the div that we are going to inject, that AJAX is going to inject the response of the server into. So it's going to be here. Then here we're going to create another div which we're going to give a class of load. Let's call it load message, and there we're going to have an ID. Let's call it more data. Alright, that's for the markup. We're going to use an AJAX and jQuery AJAX to inject content into these two div. So right now, let's start writing our AJAX code. And remember, AJAX is part of JavaScript, so we have to put it in a script tag. So at the bottom here, we'll create a simple script tag. Here we're going to put in our AJAX code. So we'll simply say document ready function. So this is where we're going to place our AJAX code. So first we create a variable which we call limit, set it to 3. Then we'll create another variable. You can use let. I'm just using var. You can use let if you want. Let's say it to 0. These values are going to, this value especially is going to change later. So then just create one more variable, call it action. It's going to be a string of inactive. We're going to use to keep track of when data is coming and when data is not coming. That's for this. Then we'll create a function that is going to grab the data with AJAX. We're going to call it underscore post, and this function is going to receive 2 arguments, which is limit and start. Alright, this is just your normal JavaScript function. So inside this function we're going to make our AJAX call. So we're going to say jQuery.AJAX. It's going to pass in an object, and this object is going to take in some parameters, the first of which is the URL. So we are defining the URL that we want to send the request, the HTTP request to. So we'll call the URL, let's call it fetch. We've not created this URL yet. We'll create this URL in Django in a moment. Then we'll specify the method we want to use, which is going to be a get method. Alright, then the data we want to send with our request, put that in, this usually be an object. Here we want to send the limit and we're also sending the start. So yeah, this is the property and this is the value. We can actually use just one like this. When the property and the value are the same, you can use one like this. It works. That's in JavaScript, but for simplicity, so you understand what we're doing, I'll just pull this to. Okay, so these are the data that is sending. Then one more thing, we're going to set the cache. Sorry about this into the, don't forget to comma here because it's an object. Okay, so once our request is successful, AJAX has this jQuery AJAX has this special success property or part of the object, which is the function that is going to return the response. So this is the function that is going to return our response when our request is successful. So what do we get back? The server sends the response to us, and this response can be a JSON data, it can be plain text, can be an XML, it can even be an HTML, which is what we are going to be sending back from our server. So what do we want to do with the response? We want to grab the, sorry I keep forgetting this slash here. We want to grab the ID for our content because we want to pass the response here. So grabbing this, we're going to say close that container. Here we want to append the response. Okay, so we want to append the response which we are getting back from the server into the content div. Then we'll do that. We have to check, you say if response is equals to empty string, that is, there's nothing more coming from the server. We want to give out a message. So what we're going to do, we're going to if there's an empty response, there's nothing's coming out, we are grabbing the ID of the load message div, which is more data, grabbing the ID, then we are inputting an HTML button. Of no post found. So that's what we want to put to the screen. No post found. Then we say else if there's more data coming up from the server. We also want to put messages. So we copy this here inside the more data and div also. But this time we're going to say loading more posts. Actually, this part can either be, maybe if you are creating a spinning image or whatever you want to put, it can be a spinning image, can be some kind of an animation that shows that more data are coming. Alright, so here we are going to write loading more data, and we are using a bootstrap class of button dash. Let's change this to success. So you know that we are getting more data from the server. Alright, then we are changing the action back to active, no inactive, because we want, okay, that's for that. So what we simply do here is that grabbing back the response that the server sent back, we are appending the response in the post container which we created up there, and also we are checking if the response is empty. Then we have put a button showing that no more data or no post found. Then if there's still more data, we want to show a button called loading more post or loading So that's for that. Then remember this whole AJAX call is a function, so we have to call this function for it to work. So outside the full function, I think, let me not miss it, outside the load. Yeah, so we are going to call this function. I'm going to say if action, which we defined upstairs, is equals to inactive, double equal to active, set the action back to active. Then we want to call the load post function. I think we call the load underscore post data function. And remember, the function takes in two arguments. Then it takes in two arguments, so we'll pass in the limit variable and the start variable as those arguments. So we'll call it passing in our limit start variable. But we'll head over back to Django. Here we are going to create a function that will handle the request from the AJAX. So we'll call this function the request. Now this request that is coming from the AJAX function is taking limit parameter. Then we're going to grab the limit by saying request dot get, because the method is get dot get. This get method has its own get. And what do we want? We want the limit parameter that is coming. We also want to grab the start also that is coming from the request. So request dot get. Right now, I haven't gotten these two. We're going to grab the post by saying post equals to, first let's import our model. We're going to import from dot model import. Alright, so we're going to say block post dot object dot all. We're grabbing all the data. We want to set the limit of data that we want to grab at a time. So we're going to say starting from the start variable that we defined, which is containing the start and value for a request, and then we're going to set the end to the limit. Alright, so we are grabbing the data starting from 0, which is the value that we sent from the server, and the limit of data we want to receive, which is the limit which is coming also from AJAX. Or we have to convert this to an integer in case to avoid any error. So because we want an integer value. Also the same with this. Same with this. Alright. Okay, so we are into a contest, which is going to receive the posts. We create the here we want to return a render, because what we want to send back is an HTML which we've not created yet. So we're going to put this inside post. Let's call it results, call it anything .html. Like I said before, I said the response can be either a JSON data, plain text, XML, or HTML. In this case, we are sending an HTML back as our response. So make no mistake, you can also return, if you want to send a JSON response, you know how to do that by reporting your HTTP response or using your JSON response from Django. But in this case, we are sending back HTML. Don't forget to put your request here. Then pass in the context. Alright, passing our context. That's for that. So let's head over to the template inside the post. Let's create a result. Okay, so this is simply going to contain the data that we want from our server. Describe how we want to receive the response. So since it's going to return as a list, we have to use the Django Ginger and templates to loop through it by saying for, let's say, post in, what did we call it in the view again? We called it list, post list, I mean. Alright, so I'm gonna end for. So we are looping through it, and inside here we're gonna put a kind of description of how I want our data to view. So define a card, a bootstrap card, the two margin at the top and the bottom, specify a width for the card, and the card head we have post dot title, which is coming from this the title from the database, and then I have then post dot post, which is also coming from the database. We want to put this in the card body, and in the card footer we want to put the author, post dot author. So this is a clear description of how I want to receive the data from the server. So this is going to be our result. So when we save this, next we need to define the URL. We have this. Okay, so here we have to import the view function, which we called post fetch. Import post fetch view. Then here we define the path for it. Post data. Alright, we're good to go. So let's save this now and then double check and see. I've closed this now if everything is intact. Okay, so save this, and now we should be able to preview our data, our first data. So we've not done any screw events yet, but now we should be able to see the first 3 data which is set as a limit. Am I getting this error? Sorry, you think I'm in the wrong environment. Check if our server is still running. Let me restart the server again. Okay, our server is running. So if we refresh, invalid shorthand property initializer. I don't really know what that is. Let's double check our code. Okay, sorry, the reason why we're having that error because the cache I set it to mistakenly set it to equals to itself to a column, and double check for any other errors. I guess that's the only one. So let's go back and refresh. We are still getting a 500 internet server error. Alright, let me check again. Yes, that is coming from. Oh, sorry, the error we are getting is because we had an syntax error here. We had the syntax error here. It's supposed to be end for, not end for. So that was the error we're having. So now if we save it and we head back and refresh, now we are getting our response back. Good. So we are getting our first 3 data. We are getting our first 3 HTML data from the server, which we are fetching with AJAX. So that's working now. So the next, we're not done yet, so we're going to head back to AJAX. So, alright, heading back to AJAX, you're going to write some check for the screw event. So what we want to do now, we'll say when the page is scroll. So let me just, to save time, we'll just copy and explain. So here we are going to check for a screw event on the window, which is the window of your screen. Then we are checking for the windows from the top, screen from the top, the height of the window if it's greater than the height of the content container, and checking if the action is active, inactive. When that is true, we set the action back to active. Then we reset the start variable equals to the current start variable, which is 0 plus the limit, giving the new start variable to be equivalent to 3. Then we are calling the set timeout function with the callback function that is going to record the load post data again, passing the limit, which is 3 that we set, and the new start value, which is equivalent to 3, and asking to wait for about 1 millisecond. So you can determine the kind of time you want the function to wait before you record another extra 3. I set mine to 1 second. You can set yours to 2 seconds or probably 500 milliseconds or whatever. So that's for that. So when we screw to the bottom of the page, it resends another AJAX request, which is recalling the load post data with a new set of arguments, which is the new set of start variable that we've defined. So this is how it's going to be done. So we head back to the view. There's one more thing to do. So now we already reset the start variable. Now when we are sending the second request, we have to let Django know the new limit now, which is going to be the start variable plus the limits that we defined. So when the start variable increases to 3, it takes the 3 and add it to the limits that we had before, which is going to be like 6. So that's how we're going to be doing it. So we'll save this and we'll test it in our browser. I hope everything is working fine. Double check one more time for in case there's any error. Head back to our server, our HTML page, and refresh. Just watch the screw. Once I screw to the bottom, you see it fetches more data. Now we have our next 3. You screw again to the bottom for 1 second, it fetches more data. Screw again for another 1 second, you see it fetches another extra 3. For 1 more seconds, fetches another extra 3. So our AJAX core is working. We are getting more data when we scroll our page. Alright guys, so this is it. This is the very first example. In our next video, we'll be working another interesting AJAX example with Django. So before you go, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button so that other Django developers can also find this video. Thank you and stay